He served his country with silence, but at Thanksgiving, his own family laughed like he wasn't even in the room. The hostess didn't call his name. She just looked at the last empty chair and said, "We can squeeze in if we have to." So he stood there, coat still on, hands full, waiting to see if anyone noticed he hadn't sat down. How many times can a man serve without ever being served back and still show up with something warm in his hands? It was the second Thursday in November, and the wind had shifted like it always did before the season changed. Horace Langston walked up the brick steps of his sister's house, holding a foil-covered casserole in one hand and a paper bag of dinner rolls tucked under the other. The front door was already ajar, laughter drifting out like it belonged to someone else's memory. Inside, the table was long, full, familiar, but different this year. 12 place settings. No folding chairs. No extras. Just enough for those who were expected. He glanced around. No one met his eye. Marcus, his nephew, gave a half-smile and pointed toward the counter. "You can set it down over there, Uncle Hawk." No hug. No handshake. He placed the dish beside a tray of deviled eggs, untouched. His sister passed by with a stack of plates and a light frown, like something about the arrangement bothered her, but not enough to say anything. Horace removed his coat but didn't sit. There was no seat left, not one with his name, not even one pulled from the garage. He rested his hand lightly on the back of a dining chair, then let go. He didn't say a word. But in the quiet space where a chair should have been, something unspoken settled deeper than any carving knife on the table. Marcus was the first to speak, still holding a half-full glass of something dark, standing near the sideboard like he owned the whole evening. He wasn't loud, but the way the room quieted told Hawk that whatever came next wasn't just casual. "Uncle Hawk," Marcus said, drawing the words out like a slow pitch, "you still got that lot on Sycamore, right?" Hawk turned just slightly. He hadn't spoken since arriving. He didn't answer right away. Marcus took that as a yes. "I was thinking," he continued, "there's this development group out of Cincinnati, big money, real clean work. They're looking for corner lots like that. Zoning's changing next year. If we move fast, it's easy money. You and me, 50-50. I just need your name on the dotted line." A few heads turned toward Hawk. Not with interest. Just watching, like folks do when a fire alarm goes off but it isn't their building. He shifted his weight. One boot creaked against the hardwood. He was still holding his coat folded across one arm, the cuff of his shirt half unbuttoned from where he'd helped carry food in earlier. His other hand rested on the lip of the counter. "Have you seen the land lately?" Hawk asked, low and even. Marcus chuckled. "I mean, it's just weeds and gravel, right? That place has been empty since I was a kid." There was that smile again, like the kind people give when they're sure you'll say yes. When they've already spent the money you haven't agreed to share. "It's family land," Marcus added, almost as a reminder. "Great-granddad bought it after the war, didn't he?" Hawk nodded once. "So," Marcus pressed, "we good to move on this? I got a guy who can draw up the paperwork by Monday." There was a plastic fork tapping against a plate somewhere behind them. Someone pretending to be busy. His sister didn't speak. She was folding napkins again, same motion over and over, the edges sharp and precise. Hawk set his coat down on the empty chair behind him. It wobbled a little, uneven leg. Still no one offered him a seat. His voice, when it came, had no edges. "I'll think on it," he said. Marcus's smile faltered. Just a hair. Then he slapped Hawk's shoulder with too much familiarity and said, "No rush, UNC. Just let me know before Thursday. Timing's key." Hawk didn't answer. Instead, he walked back toward the window. The porch light outside flickered, like it couldn't decide whether to stay on. His reflection stared back in the glass, dim and a little blurred. Behind him, the sound of laughter picked up again. Someone clinked glasses. The casserole he brought hadn't been opened. He looked at it, then away. In a room full of people who shared his last name, he had never felt quite so unaccounted for. The night ended without ceremony. No one said goodbye when Horace reached for his coat. Marcus had moved on to another conversation near the fridge, voice louder now, hands moving like someone who'd already won. Hawk didn't interrupt. He folded the foil back over his untouched casserole, pressed the corners tight, and carried it out with both hands. The porch light had gone out. It flickered once when the door closed behind him, then gave up. His truck was parked just beyond the hedge, where the curb dipped low. He walked slowly. Not from age, just measured. At the tailgate, he slid the casserole dish into the cooler, shut it with a quiet click, and stood for a moment under the pale orange streetlight. A breeze passed. Dry leaves skittered across the sidewalk like they didn't care who was watching. Back home, the house was still. One porch light left on, not bright, just enough to guide the key. He stepped inside and set the dish on the counter. No mail. No noise. Just the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the familiar creak in the floorboard near the window. Hawk poured a glass of water from the tap. It ran slow at first, then steady. He didn't turn on the kitchen light. At the table, a small notepad sat open, lined paper, neat handwriting, columns of numbers. Property taxes. Lease dates. Expiration notices for permits. He ran one finger down the margin, not checking, just touching. His thumb paused on the corner of the page, held it for a second, then let it go. The TV remote lay on the cushion where he'd left it that morning. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he walked to the front window, pulled the curtain back half an inch, and looked out across the street. The neighbor's porch light was still on. Inside, a child danced in pajamas across the living room. The shadow of a woman leaned forward to pick something up. A different kind of house. A different rhythm. Behind him, the clock above the stove ticked once, then again. He returned to the kitchen. Wiped the counter with a folded towel. Rinsed the empty glass. Opened the refrigerator just enough to slip the casserole inside. The foil still held the crease from his fingers. He closed the door gently. In the hallway, he paused beside the shelf. A small box sat in the center. Mahogany, smooth, square. The name etched on top had begun to fade. He didn't open it. Just stood there long enough for his shoulders to relax, for his breath to steady. Then he turned off the light. The house fell back into stillness. Not lonely, just settled. And Hawk Langston, who had once marched in full gear through places no one in that dining room could pronounce, now sat quietly at his own table, with no one asking why he never looked back. The gravel under Hawk's boots shifted with each step, fine white dust rising just enough to cling to the hem of his pants. It hadn't rained in a week, and the lot on Sycamore held the heat like it remembered being more than weeds and old fence posts. He stood at the edge, arms loose by his sides, eyes tracing the line where the land met the sky. 2 orange survey flags fluttered near the east corner. New. Not city-placed. Someone had been here. Across the street, a temporary sign had gone up overnight, white background, blueprint, future site of Sycamore Executive Offices, a Marcus Langston project. The wood frame wobbled a little when the wind hit it. Someone hadn't nailed it straight. Hawk didn't move closer. He didn't need to. The land told him everything. The old chain link fence had been cut clean across the back, just wide enough to drive a truck through. Tire tracks curved in a wide arc across the clearing. A pallet of concrete mix sat beneath a plastic tarp, weighed down with 2 cinder blocks. Somebody had jumped the gun. He waited. By noon, the noise came. A white pickup rolled in first, clean, loud stereo, windows down. Marcus climbed out with his usual bounce, sunglasses tucked into his collar, phone already pressed to his ear. Behind him came 2 more trucks. One hauling lumber. One with a generator strapped to the bed. No one looked his way. The men set up without question, staking fresh corners, measuring, laughing. One of them pointed toward the middle of the lot and drew something in the dirt with his boot. Marcus nodded, gave a thumbs up, then leaned against the truck, sipping from a to-go cup. That's when he saw Hawk. A flicker of something crossed his face, pause, blink, grin. He walked over slowly, hand raised like they were old friends meeting at a gas station. UNC, he said, drawing the word out, you came to see the future? Hawk didn't answer. His gaze stayed on the man laying out boards where the sweet gum tree used to stand. The ground was flatter now. Like the memory of that tree had been erased with one pass of a bulldozer. Marcus followed his eyes. Don't worry. We'll plant something new. Landscapers got big plans for this place. Hawk didn't blink. His hands were still in his pockets. You're gonna love what we do here, Marcus added. Classy stuff. Not your average office boxes. You'll see. The laughter from the crew carried across the lot. One man shouted, should we pour a little extra for the old guy's corner? More chuckles. Marcus didn't turn around. He didn't need to. They don't mean nothing, he said softly. Just talking. Hawk shifted his weight, then looked down at his boot. The dust had turned the leather pale. He didn't wipe it off. Marcus took a step back, still smiling. Anyway, we'll be wrapped before winter. Got a ribbon cutting planned, whole 9 yards. Might even name a bench after you. The words hung in the air like they were waiting to be caught. But Hawk just nodded once. Not agreement. Just acknowledgement. Then turned. Walked the long line of the lot's edge, one step at a time, until the sign disappeared behind him. He didn't look back. The wind picked up, lifting the corners of the tarp. The cinder blocks shifted, just slightly, and the plastic began to flap again. No one noticed. The cement truck pulled in just after 7. The sun hadn't cleared the tree line yet, and dew still clung to the edges of the lot, softening the crunch of boots on gravel. A man in a neon vest motioned for the chute to swing left. The machine groaned. Wet gray mix poured slow, steady, into a rectangle traced out with string and stakes. Horace Langston watched from the passenger seat of a sedan parked across the street. The window was halfway down. Morning air moved in, cool and sharp, carrying the scent of wet dust and gasoline. He said nothing. Next to him sat a woman in a charcoal suit, sleeves neatly rolled just above the wrist. Her hair was clipped back. Not tight. Just firm enough to suggest she didn't waste time. Her name was Attorney Laverne Cole, and she hadn't asked Hawk why he hadn't stopped them sooner. She was flipping through a manila folder balanced on her lap, one page at a time. Quiet fingers. No rustling. They never filed a change of deed, she said flatly. They assumed silence meant surrender. Hawk didn't reply. A worker across the lot laughed loud. Another called out something about rebar. The mix in the form was starting to settle, smooth and even. One man dragged a long metal rake across it, slow and practiced. Laverne tapped the top corner of a document with the back of her pen. This survey from '84 shows the oak tree. Roots crossed into township land, but the trunk stayed on yours. County recognizes that line. So does the state. It's tight, but it's yours. Hawk blinked once, slow. A breeze caught the corner of the folder, lifted the edge. Laverne caught it with 2 fingers, held it in place. She waited, then spoke softer. We can file a cease and desist this morning. I'll take it to the county clerk myself. You don't need to be there. Still no answer. The cement truck started to back up. Beep. 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 A man slapped the side of the drum and waved the driver to cut the chute. Someone pulled a fresh tarp over the slab. They'll have about 3 hours before it sets, Laverne said. She closed the folder. Rested it gently on her lap. Her eyes shifted toward Hawk, but not direct. She looked just past him, toward the cracked windshield, the small blue VA sticker in the bottom corner. Hawk finally turned his head. Not much. Just enough to see the first footprints in the wet concrete boot tread, size 11 maybe, pressed too deep by someone too fast. He adjusted the cuff of his jacket. Brushed off a fine thread of lint that wasn't there a minute ago. Then he nodded. Once. Laverne opened the door. Stood. Smoothed her suit. She didn't slam the car shut. Didn't rush. And Horace Langston stayed in his seat, staring at the slab like it was a gravestone somebody else had written his name on. And misspelled it. The letter came 2 days later. Certified. Envelope stiff, corners sharp. Marcus had signed for it without checking who it was from. He opened it on the tailgate of his truck, still parked crooked beside the lot. A crew was unloading siding panels, joking about lunch. The sun was already up, but Hawk was nowhere in sight. Marcus skimmed the first line, then slowed. By the 3rd paragraph, his hand had stopped moving. The wind caught the bottom edge of the paper, but he didn't press it down. Just stared, mouth slightly open, like the words weren't meant for him. Across town, Hawk was in line at the post office. He held a small package wrapped in brown paper, string tied tight. His posture was upright, hands steady. The clerk called next, and he stepped forward without urgency. He didn't mention the cease and desist. Didn't mention the land. Just paid for the postage, nodded, and walked out. The sun hit his shoulders just as he reached the sidewalk. He paused. Adjusted the brim of his cap. The old VA pin still fastened just above the bill. A child on a scooter passed behind him without noticing. Back at the lot, Marcus paced. Phone to his ear. Voice sharp, clipped. No, I didn't know, he said more than once. He never said anything. He kicked a piece of scrap wood that bounced off the cement curb. The crew had gone quiet, sensing something they didn't want to ask about. At dusk, Hawk stood outside his fence, fingers resting on the cold metal post. The same fence Marcus's team had cut weeks earlier. It hadn't been repaired. Just bent back like a shoulder out of socket. A neighbor walked by with a dog, offered a slow nod. Hawk returned it. Nothing more. Inside, the living room light spilled a warm pool onto the porch floorboards. On the table beside his chair sat the folder Laverne had left. Closed now. No papers sticking out. Just the clean surface of manila against wood. He didn't sit yet. Instead, he walked to the window, where the curtain never quite closed all the way. He looked out, past the sidewalk, past the shrubs. Past the row of cars that never parked straight. He looked out like a man who'd always seen more than people thought. And been seen less than anyone cared to admit. And for the first time, Marcus realized that what made his uncle invisible wasn't his age. Or his quiet. Or his uniform. It was that no one had ever really looked. The hearing was scheduled for 10:15. Just one item on the docket. The clerk had barely looked up when Horace Langston entered, his name checked off in quiet ink beside the number. He wore a charcoal jacket, the same one from Sunday service, and carried nothing but a folded piece of paper in his inside pocket. His steps didn't echo, but they held a rhythm. Even. Measured. Marcus was already seated. Suit too sharp, tie pulled too tight, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. When Hawk walked in, Marcus stood halfway, then sat back down as if remembering something late. No nod. No greeting. Attorney Laverne Cole followed behind Hawk, her pace steady, her briefcase balanced in her left hand like it belonged there. She didn't speak until addressed. Didn't need to. The documents had already been filed. When the judge asked if there was anything further to present, Hawk didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. He reached into his jacket and placed the original deed, creased down the middle but signed in blue ink, on the table beside Laverne. She slid it forward with one hand, wordless. The courtroom wasn't crowded. A few construction workers in the back. Maybe someone from zoning. No news cameras. No audience to impress. But the silence that followed felt full. The judge reviewed the papers. Adjusted her glasses. Reread the boundary lines. When she spoke, her voice was clear, almost gentle. Mr. Langston, this parcel has remained in your name without interruption since 1984. No transfer of ownership has occurred. Any structures built on this property without your permission are, by law, considered unlawful. She looked toward Marcus but didn't address him directly. Hawk didn't move. Not even when the gavel tapped twice. Not when Marcus's lawyer leaned in, whispering fast. Not even when Marcus's shoulders slumped just enough to shift his silhouette. Back outside, Hawk stood at the edge of the courthouse steps, sunlight cutting down the left side of his face. The wind lifted the collar of his coat, then let it fall. Laverne adjusted the strap on her shoulder. Didn't speak. She knew. He pulled the deed from his pocket again. Unfolded it. Smoothed the edge with one thumb. The paper didn't shine, didn't sparkle. It just held its truth, plain and quiet. And on that paper was his name, first and last, written the way his father had said it the day he returned home in uniform. No extra letters. No abbreviations. No assumptions. Just Horace Langston. A name nobody had needed to raise their voice to remember. The land stayed quiet after the ruling. No machines moved. No workers came back. Just wind across concrete and the hum of late cicadas holding on longer than they should. Hawk didn't walk across the lot. He stayed by the fence, just outside the boundary he never crossed even when they mocked him. Marcus had left town. Or at least, that's what folks said. No one had seen him since the courthouse. The sign on the site still stood Langston Ridge, coming soon, though the word coming looked more like a question now than a promise. Some kids had thrown mud at the bottom. Nobody cleaned it. On a Thursday morning, Hawk brought out 2 folding chairs and set them under the shade of the old pecan tree that still stood at the corner of the property. It had seen all the boundaries shift, but its roots had never moved. He placed 1 chair facing east, 1 facing west. Then he sat. Didn't pull out a phone. Didn't bring coffee. Just sat. The VA cap rested on his knee. His hand rested on the brim, not lifting it, just keeping it from catching the wind. Laverne stopped by around noon. She didn't get out of the car. Just nodded through the window, and Hawk nodded back. The kind of nod that said, "We did what needed doing. That's enough." The county sent an offer the following week. They wanted to buy the land. Said they'd turn it into a community garden. Hawk read the letter once. Folded it again. Left it on the porch under a rock. He didn't answer. And they didn't press. Months passed. Fall crept in slow. Leaves browned from the edges first, like paper curled by old fire. Hawk didn't change the routine. He just added a coat. The chairs stayed. One afternoon, a young man walked up the road. Not Marcus. Someone younger. Maybe 20. Backpack, worn shoes. Paused at the fence, unsure if he should keep walking. Hawk didn't speak. Just tilted his head toward the empty chair. The boy sat. Quiet. Minutes passed before he asked if the land belonged to Hawk. Hawk nodded once. That was all. Before sunset, the boy stood, thanked him, and left. Next day, 2 more showed up. Same question. Same answer. No signs, no flyers. Just word of mouth. They came to sit. Not to build. Not to buy. To sit. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with strangers. Sometimes with Hawk, when he felt like being there. The chairs were never taken away. One morning, someone planted a small wooden sign near the edge of the lot. No nails. Just leaned against the fence. The words burned in soft lettering. This land remembers who it belongs to. Hawk saw it. Read it. Sat down next to it. And didn't say a word. Some victories don't come with applause. They come in silence, like 2 empty chairs under an old pecan tree, waiting for someone to notice what they once overlooked. Hawk Langston didn't need to raise his voice or reclaim what was always his. He simply waited. Not out of bitterness, but because he understood something too many forget: you don't have to chase recognition to carry worth. The land knew his name even when his own family didn't speak it with respect. And in the end, it was the land, not the lawsuits, that bore witness to his quiet resolve. This story reminds us that dignity doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it just endures. And when the world rushes past us, what's remembered is not what we said, but how we stood. even if all we did was stay still long enough for truth to grow roots. Have you ever been overlooked by those closest to you? What did you do? Speak louder, or wait for the ground beneath your feet to speak for you? If this story sat with you in any way, like, share, and subscribe. Maybe someone out there needs to hear that staying silent doesn't mean being invisible. Sometimes, it's the quiet ones who own the ground others build on.